Welcome, everyone, to the first Best for Britain live stream lockdown of 2021. I'm delighted to be joined by trade expert, Twitter firebrand, and author of our latest report interrogating the Brexit deal, David Henig. Good evening, David. How are you?
Good evening. I was fine until you described me as a Twitter firebrand.
Well, you are. Where are you currently locked down?
I'm locked down in South London. Unfortunately, not. I didn't manage to find an island to escape to or anything like that.
Well, as a fellow South Londoner, nothing wrong with that, as far as I'm concerned. Listeners, for David, for your benefit, David and I are going to be discussing the deal. We're going to be discussing its failings and where it can be improved. And we're going to leave plenty of time for Q&A at the end. And hopefully with plenty of time for you to go and make dinner before Channel 4 News starts. So this is not intended to be a very long session. So hopefully we'll get it all wrapped up within about half an hour. So David, let's kick off in the essence of time. And let's talk about the nature of the Brexit deal that this government signed last month and how it fits with and compares to other trading relationships around the world. We're hardly the first to embark on this. Is the one that we've got fit for the 21st century?
Unfortunately not. So modern trade is rather more these days than just we'll build a car and we'll sell it in another country, or we'll raid another country and sell opium to another one, or something like that. We've kind of moved on from the 19th or the 20th century, and in the 21st century we have a complex web of transactions going on, of goods and services constantly being combined and then sold on to another country. And for that you need really quite a loose and flexible arrangement. So at the moment with Europe, we've got a £670 billion trading relationship per year. That's nearly 2 billion a day. We had another few for Switzerland, Norway, Turkey. And that's rested on free movement of services, goods, shared regulations. It meant totally seamless trade. Now, no free trade agreement was necessarily going to replace that, but even by the standards of free trade agreements, what you normally get is some kind of regulatory equivalent. You get some easing of checks. You get some more rights to provide services or to move around, or at least that's what you need for modern trade to carry on. So what you've gone from is basically UK-EU trade with the absolute best in class arrangement, virtually no barriers, to huge barriers all over the place, and some of which we're seeing and some of which we won't see until people start traveling again.
Well, of course, one of the ones that we are seeing, and it can hardly have escaped viewers who have been keeping a keen eye on Brexit news, is all of the coverage of supermarkets struggling to get certain items into their stores in Northern Ireland, particularly fresh fruit and vegetables, which, of course, are the absolute requirements for a healthy diet, particularly in a pandemic when you're trying to keep your population healthy. We've also had Michael Gove talking up what he calls significant additional pressure at the border at the end of last week. Now, those problems, of course, are no surprise to most of us, most of the people watching this. Anyone who's followed the Brexit saga since 2016 will have heard all of that cautioning that, of course, was dismissed as Project Fear. But David, why is it happening? And could the government have avoided it? And can it sort out the problem without having to go back and totally renegotiate the deal?
Fully avoided it? No. Eased the problems considerably? Yes.
Right.
All of these problems, absolutely every single one was predicted, and lots of people who seem to have suddenly disappeared from Twitter were used to tell us that it was all Project Fear. We didn't know what we were talking about. I mean, number one, you've agreed a deal on Christmas Eve, you've implemented on January the 1st. Clearly nobody had time to read it all. Nobody had time to get used to the specific arrangements. That's pretty much unprecedented in any kind of trade politics, to go from the situation of free trade to the situation of barriers, legal requirements, without really telling anybody what they were until a few hours beforehand. But even beyond that, okay, on food and drink, you could have aimed for some kind of equivalence, which means fewer inspections, where you could dramatically reduce the inspection requirements. Some of the problems have come to do with rules of origin, which is proving the product can be sold for zero tariff. You can have looser rules of origin requirements, making it easier to meet those. We knew there would be haulage issues with this multi loads going between the Great Britain and Northern Ireland, or between Great Britain and France, because we've been used to a market where you could bring in anything. Sorry, I should explain. Multi-loads is where there's different kinds of products in the lorry going to supermarkets, right, and they have to be checked.
So it's our understanding that that a lorry can only move as fast as the slowest moving item it currently contains in terms of the amount of checks and an extra regulation it has to go through. Is that right?
That's correct. And we thought that was going to be in some way eased at the very least, and it doesn't appear that that's been the case. Now, getting absolutely accurate information is not not always easy, but it seems like look, there are many possibilities. This is the sort of stuff that most countries are used to doing day in, day out, because you had a seamless single market. You don't have this in within the European Economic Area, but in other countries, or indeed before 1992 in the UK, this was what people spent their lives doing. How can we try to ease it gently? We've seen no such effort from the UK government. Well, now they may scramble to pick up, but there were things that could have been done, but you wouldn't have ended the barriers, but a lot of the trade that's been lost, we could have helped, and now we're losing trade day by day, and that is a consequence of the government's approach to negotiations. Now, you don't need to renegotiate the deal to start easing those, but you do have to start taking the problem seriously. You have to start thinking, what can we do about this? What can we offer to the EU? Will the EU accept our offer into making it easier? So you can have standalone agreements on food inspections, for example, on mutual recognition of industrial goods, but you don't automatically get these things because the EU will have asks as well. And it's not clear whether the UK government is actually prepared to ask for these things, or whether this uniquely British version of sovereignty, which doesn't allow us to kind of give anything away to the EU, is going to prohibit us from doing it. But it really is quite remarkable in a modern trade setting that you don't have an agreement on reducing inspections of food and drink, and that is absolutely down a UK government choice. And they could change that, and they could make it a lot easier, but they have chosen not to do so far.
And where else does the deal fall short? So you've written a brilliant report for us, and it's on our website. I suggest everyone who cares about this topic goes and has a read. But looking at that report, what are the key areas for improvement of this deal? And if you could break that down maybe into the short-term things, the quick wins, the medium-term things, and then what does the deal need to contain, but we're really looking at those being much longer term issues and harder to negotiate.
Yeah, quick wins and trade deals don't necessarily go together, but let's do our best. data equivalence is kind of in there as a sort of hook for a few months while it's being negotiated. Similarly, financial services equivalence, neither is really in there. Both are supposed to be agreed this year, but they really need to be prioritized. And we may have to sign up to some regulatory confines to make them happen.
And just for viewers who may not be quite aware of the terminology, what do we mean by regulatory equivalence? What's the layman's description of that?
So this is the ability of UK companies to transfer data to and between the EU and the UK. It's also the ability to provide services on an equivalent basis, to provide certain types of financial services into EU member states on some kind of equivalent basis. It's actually quite complicated, which is why it's not so easy to explain in an easy way.
But it's very easy for people to understand that most, particularly service sector organizations, rely incredibly heavily on data, and that is, really the nuts and bolts of what they're doing. So to not have that in this deal surely feels like a real own goal for Britain.
That's right. So essentially, I mean, we can go back one step. Most goods and services are subject to individual regulations in individual member states. Now, in the EU, you have full right. If you can provide a service or sell a good in one country, you can do it in any country. If you're not an EU member or a single market member, you don't have that right. So what you then need to do is you need to reach agreements to say we meet those regulations in some way. If you want to reduce checks or indeed get access to the market at all to sell the goods or services. So in financial services, that's through a process called equivalence at the moment. That's the best we can do. For examination of data, which, as you say, is very important for a lot of services business, that's through a data adequacy agreement. It's going to be a difficult issue there. Then there is something called the European Standardization Framework. That is voluntary best practice standards in which then form the basis of EU-wide regulations. At the moment, we are part of the European standardization bodies and quite influential. We should be able to stay in that, but it's not clear that the UK government will want us to do so because it may conflict with a US trade deal. There's a broader question: membership of EU regulatory bodies like aviation safety. Again, that would mean joining our regulations, but I don't think we're going to have different regulations on aviation safety. There is a little bit in the deal on aviation safety, specifically on a new framework. Frankly, we could have avoided it by staying in the regulator. If we can't do that, we need a lot more in the agreement on that. In general, we need to be talking a lot more to the EU about regulations and dialogue. This is to basically ensure that if the EU changes their regulations, it doesn't penalize UK companies who can no longer meet them. That's incredibly important for us to do trade. That's just a 21st century norm, that countries talk to each other about regulatory issues. That's hardly in the agreement at all. There's not very much about the rights to work in the EU and in the UK, because we've been neurotic about this issue for a long time. But obviously that's hit the headlines because of musicians who don't have the right to provide services short term in the EU.
Britain hasn't, got a great reputation for being a major exporter, but surely music is one of the things that Britain is famously good at exporting. What do you think has been driving, that pretty churlish decision not to offer work permits to touring musicians around Europe?
Look, we don't know what happened within the negotiating room. I suspect that the EU were asking for something as well, and we probably weren't willing to give it, because we're very defensive on offering anybody the right to a visa, because they'll all immediately move here apparently. But even then, something clearly went wrong in the negotiations, or maybe the EU didn't want to, thought that we needed to pay a bit of a higher price for it, give it more priority, which may be right. The UK didn't evidently particularly prioritize anything in negotiations, so issues like this may just have been dropped for lack of time. So we're not quite sure what happened. And it's not just about the musicians providing the services. It's about, for example, the rights of the lorries that drive them and their equipment to make multiple stops in Europe. So there's more than one issue with regard to musical tours of the EU. But something has happened there, and that needs to to be changed. The rights of recognition of professional qualifications in the EU, that might affect lots of people providing all sorts of different services. There are all manner of restrictions there.
So forgive me, so that is if you qualified, say, as an accountant in Sheffield, and you've got clients that need you to do some work in the EU, is it potentially the case that you wouldn't be able to perform an audit, you wouldn't be qualified to do an audit of a company within the EU? Are we talking about that kind of thing?
Yes, we are. The rights to practice law or accountancy, architecture, or many other regulated professions, and what rights you have. Basically, as of now, virtually none to have that qualification recognised. You have just a framework that basically says in the future we might come up with a new agreement, but there's not much more than that. So yes, that will hamper UK business as well. And just one thing in general, we don't even know who the minister is. I mean, apart from Michael Gove, who appears to be the minister for kind of everything that might be complicated in government, we don't even know which department is now managing UK-EU trade relations, or a minister that's doing it. So that would seem to be a fairly obvious first step.
Do you think that it's likely that Liz Truss would take on future trade negotiations and discussions with the EU, or do you think that it'll stick with Gove? Do you have any feel for that?
No, I think it should be the same as our other trade relations, because this is still going to be our most important trade relation. I know that a lot of figures around the government, around the Brexit movement, say, oh no, you no longer trade so much with your nearest neighbours. This is called the gravity theory of trade, or the gravity effect. It's not true. The gravity effect is still strong. The UK's strongest trade relationship is still going to be with our neighbours. Some services that you sell, for example, online web apps on your phone, they may be geography independent. But if you want to sell services like accountancy or consultancy, you're going to be more easily able to sell those to nearer markets, which frankly, you know the markets more, and it's easier and cheaper to go and visit them.
As I understand it, actually the trend has been towards more regional integration economically than less over the last few decades. Places like the ASEAN countries in Asia, the NAFTA style things. It's more about regional integration than less, surely.
There is a lot of regional integration now within these complex webs of goods and services, because it's just easier and safer to do it on a smaller scale. And there is a real worry that the UK is now going to be excluded from these cross-European supply chains. Nobody will want us anymore to be a part of them in case there are problems at the border, or they find that people in the UK don't have the rights to go and attend a meeting in Germany or whatever it is. So there's real risks in that. That is going to take some time to work through.
Now, before we go on to questions from the audience, just one further thing, talking about rights that have been taken away from people. Let's talk about young people and students, because the government has sort of infamously scrapped the Erasmus scheme. It was hugely popular with British students. They've replaced it with this so-called Turing scheme. When can we expect the UK to become more open to joining these EU-run schemes that you don't have to be a member of the EU to participate in?
I think it's going to take a real change of attitude from a real suspicion in government that anything to do with the EU is going to be trouble. They want to entrap us in some way, and frankly, a fear in the Labour Party as well, towards one that says we're going to have to learn to get on with our neighbours. This is where our trade and future prosperity. If we don't, we're going to lose out economically, and I think that will take some time. There's nothing to stop us applying for these things pretty much now. There are countries in Erasmus that aren't particularly great friends of the EU, but at the moment we seem to know better. And with Erasmus, I think this is really short-sighted, not just for the UK students who can't go to the EU. I think it's the other way around as well. So there's a generation now of potentially future EU leaders who won't have studied or won't know very much about the UK. And I think that is really quite dangerous for us.
Indeed. Okay, we've got lots of excellent questions coming through. I'm going to start with one from Johanna, who's got a question about Northern Ireland, asking, could it solve its supply chain issues if it just imported fresh produce through the Republic of Ireland rather than via the mainland of the UK?
Yes, there is there's a slight caveat to that, which is that so Northern Ireland follows EU rules for goods, but it follows UK rules for tax and VAT and things like that. So it is going to be quite a complex environment in some ways in Northern Ireland. But for importing of goods, it's going to be easier for Northern Ireland to source them from the Republic of Ireland and in turn from the rest of the EU. And I think we will see some supply chains reconfiguring, basically excluding Great Britain and going straight from kind of France and other EU countries into Northern Ireland.
We've got a great question from Ben here, who is a business owner. He runs a small building contractor, and he says that every couple of years some work comes up in nearby Europe. Will this be as easy as it has always been for him in the future, or should he just not bother fulfilling that, those customer requirements?
I think the question is, it's not going to be as easy, but the question is, are there any actual restrictions that are going to stop you doing that work? There may be restrictions in terms of whether it would need a work permit and whether you're even allowed to provide that service that you would need advice on. So if that's too much to get advice on it, and you may find that you get advice and advice says there's a lot of things you would need to do, or there's reasons why you wouldn't be able to do it, you may find the advice says, no, actually you could do that and there isn't a restriction. But it is going to be more tricky. I can't sugarcoat that like the government and say no new barriers. It is going to be more tricky, and you've got to be prepared to check whether you're allowed to do the work that you've been doing previously in the EU.
Thank you. We've had a question from Teresa, who's asking about what the deal might mean for animal welfare. And of course, environmental regulation, two issues that we know the public at large are very, very passionate about. I remember during the referendum, particularly on the issue of animal welfare, there were Remainers saying, Britain may seek to lower its standards, and there were Brexiters pointing to foie gras and bullfighting. What's the current status in the deal that we've got now, David?
Right, environment there is actually good news. I mean, I think that's quite a strong part of the agreement. Both sides have signed up to, at the very least, non-regression. So if the UK chooses to backtrack on environmental commitments, in theory, the EU could take action against it, impose tariffs. That should, at the very least, provide incentive for the UK not to do that. So in environmental protection, both sides have signed up for carbon pricing. So I like the environmental provisions. I think that they're quite as strong as you could probably expect in a trade deal. Animal welfare, less so. Animal welfare, there's just a few lines saying both parties agree to cooperate. That's broadly pretty meaningless. So at this stage, there is talk of a live animal export ban. There's still work going on what that might actually mean. Yes, we have to wait to see, but clearly that's also to do with a US deal. The reason we've not wanted to put in animal welfare measures so far post Brexit is because that would upset the US and the chances of a US trade deal.
But what about bee pesticides? That caused quite a flurry on Twitter a couple of days ago.
Yeah, I think where it comes to individual things like that, it's unlikely that there would be action, because what I found quite interesting about that is when the UK government put out its defensive lines and said, well, some EU countries have been given this dispensation as well. So they're still comparing themselves against the EU. And I think when it comes to individual issues, it's unlike, the deal as a whole doesn't stop you giving dispensations like that. But I think it would if the UK was to entirely allow neonicotinoids again. I think that is against the trade deal, and the EU can respond with tariffs in that situation.
We've got a sort of question here about patents and patent law. I don't know how much you know about that, but it's from Cheryl Salmon, who runs the French translation company. She said, we're getting a lot of technical work translating British patents into French. Is this because the new relationship doesn't recognize the intellectual property of British inventors through British patents? Maybe a tricky one to answer.
I'm afraid on patent law, I'm not sure. There are extensive IPR provisions in the treaty, but I couldn't tell you exactly what they mean in in day-to-day terms. But if you're getting some business, great.
Yes, indeed. Now, Sarah is asking a very pertinent question here. Where do you think proper scrutiny of this trade deal will come from now that Jacob Rees-Mogg has dissolved Hilary Benn's Brexit committee?
Well, I mean, I hope some of the other committees take a detailed look at the agreement. But I think the reality is that I don't think we are getting much scrutiny from Parliament. I think that trade deals need independent scrutiny. What best practice in other countries is to have an independent body or a public but non-governmental body which actually provides detailed scrutiny and tells you what a deal means. In the absence of that, I'm sure that there will be parliamentary committee inquiries, but we are going to struggle. But I think we were already struggling. I mean, I think the EU Scrutiny Committee, or the Hilary Benz Committee, was doing a good job. But we're talking about two volumes of a total of 1,200 pages. I've got a printed copy. That's just volume one. That's just volume one. There's two of those. The reality is that it's going to take us months to understand what they fully mean. In fact, we're still trying to understand what the withdrawal agreement meant and the Northern Ireland Protocol, and that was signed a year ago. So this is going to take time. I don't think we'll get it satisfactorily. It is something that should be pushed for, and I mean, MPs should be being pushed by businesses in their constituents to say, you need to do something about this. Whether they'll take it seriously or not, I don't know, but at some point in the future they will. But I think that they are, it's important to put the pressure on MPs to actually do a proper job of scrutiny.
And good on the hauliers who absolutely did make their voice heard when perhaps some other business groups felt they couldn't. And Sarah, you can bet your bottom dollar Best for Britain is going to do everything it can to keep on scrutinising this deal and any future deals that the government signs and any renegotiation it does with the EU. So please stick with us and help us in that effort. And as David says, write to your MPs. We've got time for a couple more quick questions. We've got one here that talks about our relationship with Japan, David, from Glenn. He asks, how effective and costly will large exporter workarounds of the sadly neglected rules of origin issue be? And would any UK adherence to a pan-European Japanese accumulation be in time to prevent major supply chain disruption? I'm wondering if this has got a particular automotive industry.
It's got an automotive spin, but there are other sectors as well. Look, there's going to be quite a shake-up in UK economic structure, in my opinion, as things like this and checks come in. I couldn't tell you exactly what is needed. Is it best to accumulate with Japan? You can do it. There's the Pan-European Mediterranean Convention on Rules of Origin, basically covers virtually every European country, plus North Africa, plus some Middle East countries, which you can join as well, which gives you a strong regional dimension. I think we've got to look at these things, and the debate, the UK debate is nothing like mature enough to actually look at these things and say, what is in our best interests? And it comes back to the question you had earlier of when are we going to be able to look at these things seriously? I'm not sure, but we need to do it as soon as possible for the sake of UK business. And yes, some business is already leaving or has already relocated, and some will. There may be new opportunities, but yes, there's an urgent need to do this.
Okay, well, we are almost up against the clock. We said that we'd be half an hour and we'd give you time to make dinner before the 7 o'clock news. So, final question, incredibly important. The Wine Society has stopped shipments to me in Northern Ireland. What are the obstacles, and are they ever likely to ship to me again? And that's from Nigel. Thirsty Nigel in Belfast.
Thirsty Nigel. No, sorry. First of all, I've drunk all the wine. Sorry. If only. Wine stuff going to consumers in Northern Ireland. In theory, once the situation is bedded down, in theory it should be allowed. In practice, though, there is going to have to be a check to make sure that goods meet the required levels. Now, this is the sort of stuff that this stuff could be done within the agreement as it stands at the moment, of just saying, we shouldn't need to have inspections for this. You shouldn't need to pay extra tariffs on wine there for your personal consumption in Northern Ireland. But at this stage, we haven't bedded down all the processes. So in theory, there's no reason why you can't carry on getting your wine from the Wine Society in Northern Ireland. But in practice, that may be something the UK government has to sort out. And again, the Northern Ireland Protocol is there's a lot of operational issues that still need sorting.
Well, thank you very much, David. That's it for today. David, thank you for writing our report, for speaking with us tonight, and thank you to everyone who's watched, especially those who submitted questions. There is a very big job to do in keeping this government's feet to the fire, and we really hope that you will join us in our efforts this year and in the years to come. If you haven't already read David's report, it's on our website. And if you're able to give a donation to help fund our work, we will be very, very grateful. These are incredibly difficult times, and there is a huge amount to do. Just visit bestbritain.org/donate. So thank you so much for watching. Enjoy the rest of your evening, and we hope to see you very soon. Goodbye.